Social Security is headed for a 25% automatic benefit cut in just 11 years when the trust funds run dry. This mathematical reality represents an $84 trillion long-term shortfall. Imagine your grandmother suddenly losing a quarter of her monthly income. For the 15% of senior women who rely on Social Security for 90% or more of their income, this isn't an abstract policy discussion. It's the difference between paying rent or becoming homeless. Today we're breaking down exactly how we got here and what this crisis means for your financial future, your retirement plans, and possibly your family's security in their golden years. The ordinary world, how Social Security was supposed to work. Wait, isn't Social Security just something our grandparents worry about? Think again. This affects your future in a major way. If you're under 40, you might think Social Security is just some boring government program that takes a chunk of your paycheck for something you'll never see. But here's the reality check. This system was designed to be a cornerstone of everyone's retirement, including yours, and understanding how it was supposed to work is key to seeing why it's in trouble now. Back in 1935, when Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Social Security into law, the country was in the midst of the Great Depression. Imagine this scene. FDR at his desk, pen in hand, signing legislation that promised Americans they wouldn't face destitution in their old age. The newsreels captured the moment with dramatic flair, announcing a new era of security for the elderly. But what most people don't realize is that Social Security was never meant to be your only source of retirement income. The original design was actually pretty clever. Think of retirement security as a three-legged stool. And no, this isn't some weird furniture ad. One leg was Social Security, providing a basic foundation of income. The second leg was a pension from your employer. Remember those? Your company actually paying you after you retire? And the third leg was your personal savings. All three working together were supposed to keep you financially stable in your golden years. But here's where things get concerning. The entire Social Security system was built on a simple math equation. Lots of workers paying in, relatively few retirees taking money out. For decades, this formula worked beautifully. In the 1960s, picture 5 young factory workers pooling their resources to support one retiree. That was the actual ratio. With that kind of setup, there was plenty of money flowing in to cover the checks going out. Many millennials have this idea that their Social Security taxes go into some personal account with their name on it, like a forced savings plan they'll access later. But that's not how it works. The money you're paying in right now goes directly to current retirees. Your grandparents are literally spending your payroll taxes right now on their groceries and utility bills. This setup is what economists call a pay-as-you-go system. Your paycheck gets dinged for 6.2%, with your employer matching another 6.2%. And that money immediately flows out to pay current benefits. There's no giant vault with your name on it storing your contributions until you retire. The system assumes that when it's your turn to retire, the next generation of workers will fund your benefits. For decades, this arrangement thrived. During the baby boomer years, the workforce expanded rapidly, creating a massive base of contributors. The trust funds built up reserves because more money was coming in than going out. Social Security seemed rock solid and poised to last forever. These trust funds function as the savings account for Social Security, the place where extra money goes when tax collections exceed benefit payments. When the system collected more than needed for current beneficiaries, that surplus went into these funds and was invested in special treasury bonds. It was the system's emergency savings account, designed to help weather demographic changes. However, as time passed, these secure foundations began to crack under unexpected demographic shifts. The creators of Social Security made one major assumption that seemed reasonable at the time. They assumed America would continue to have plenty of young workers to support a relatively small number of retirees. That made sense in the 1930s through the 1960s. Families were having lots of children, and people weren't living nearly as long after retirement. The average American who reached retirement age in the early days might collect benefits for 12 to 15 years. Today, many people are collecting for 20-plus years thanks to increased longevity. Remember that 5 to 1 worker-to-beneficiary ratio I mentioned from the 1960s? That was the golden era of Social Security funding. The system was collecting far more than it needed, building up those trust fund reserves, and everything seemed sustainable. the creators of Social Security couldn't have predicted how dramatically American demographics would shift. They couldn't have foreseen plummeting birth rates, increasing life expectancy, or how the nature of work and retirement would fundamentally change. What's particularly concerning is that Social Security has morphed from just one leg of the retirement stool into the main support for millions of Americans. Those company pensions have largely disappeared, replaced by 401k, that many people struggle to fund. Personal savings? With stagnant wages and rising costs of housing, education, and healthcare, many Americans find it nearly impossible to save for retirement. So a program designed to provide maybe 40% of your retirement income has become the primary source of support for many retirees. According to the Social Security Administration, among elderly beneficiaries, 37% of men and 42% of women receive 50% or more of their income from Social Security. And about 12% of men and 15% of women rely on it for 90% or more of their income. This increased dependence would be less concerning if the worker-to-beneficiary ratio had stayed stable. But something fundamental has changed. Today, instead of 5 workers supporting each beneficiary, like in the 1960s, we're approaching just 2 workers per retiree. The trust funds built up during surplus years are being depleted. The math that made Social Security work so well for decades is breaking down, not because the program was poorly designed, but because the demographic assumptions it was built upon no longer reflect reality. The 3-legged stool of retirement has become wobbly, with Social Security bearing more weight than it was ever intended to carry. The call to adventure, demographic shifts creating a perfect storm. Those demographic changes aren't just making the retirement stool wobbly, they're sawing through its legs entirely. The world Social Security was built for has vanished right before our eyes, and most of us haven't even noticed. Remember those black and white photos of your grandparents with their 4 or 5 siblings crowded together for a family portrait? That family structure was the mathematical foundation that made Social Security work. Let me blow your mind with this fact. In 1960, the average American woman had 3.6 children. Today, just 1.6. This population revolution has happened within a single lifetime. Your grandparents grew up in big families, your parents probably had fewer siblings, and now most of your friends might have just one brother or sister, if any at all. Picture our demographic family tree. Once wide and robust at the bottom, now narrowing dramatically like a balloon slowly losing air. This massive family size shift directly impacts Social Security because the system was designed as a pay-as-you-go system. Current workers fund current retirees' benefits through their payroll taxes. This worked brilliantly when we had tons of workers supporting relatively few retirees. But that worker-to-beneficiary ratio has been in free fall. From 5.1 workers per beneficiary in 1960, we're down to just 2.7 workers today. And by 2035, projections show we'll have only 2.3 workers supporting each beneficiary. Think about what that means in practical terms. Each worker today is carrying nearly twice the Social Security burden compared to workers in 1960. It's like going from 5 people helping to carry a heavy couch to just 2 or 3. Suddenly that load feels a whole lot heavier on each person's shoulders. While fewer babies are being born, people are living way longer than when Social Security was created. Back in 1960, a 65-year-old could expect to live about another 12.5 years. Today, they're looking at more than 20 years of retirement. Let me put this in perspective. When Social Security began, most people collecting benefits did so for about a decade. Now, many Americans spend 2 decades or more receiving benefits. That's fantastic news for our lifespans, but it creates another massive strain on the system. People are taking benefits out of the system for much longer periods than ever intended. By 2030, America will have more than 78 million seniors aged 65 and older, up from about 56 million today. That's a tsunami of retirees all drawing benefits at the same time, supported by a relatively smaller working population. If we visualize this with an animation, you'd see the worker-to-beneficiary ratio collapsing over time, like watching a balloon deflate as more air escapes than goes in. The fundamental problem is simple but devastating. Fewer people paying in plus more people taking out plus longer benefit collection periods equals a math problem that simply doesn't work. Some people point to immigration as a potential solution, and they're partly right. Immigrants typically arrive during their working years and contribute to Social Security immediately through payroll taxes. They help offset some of the demographic decline by increasing the workforce. But even with current immigration levels, it's just not enough to fix the fundamental imbalance we're facing. Immigration helps slow the decline, but it doesn't reverse it. The ratio of workers to beneficiaries is still projected to fall below 2.5 by mid-century. Right now, about 60% of Americans are working age. By 2080, that's projected to shrink to just 54%. Meanwhile, the percentage of the population receiving benefits keeps growing. This creates a mathematical vice grip on the system that tightens with each passing year. When you hear politicians talk about Social Security, they often frame it as a political problem that just needs the right policy solution. But at its core, this is a demographic problem, a massive shift in how many children Americans have and how long we live. No policy can change the fact that the working-age population is growing much slower than the beneficiary population. So what happens when these demographic trends collide with the financial reality of Social Security? What occurs when a system designed for a 5-to-1 worker-to-beneficiary ratio tries to function with a 2.3-to-1 ratio? It's like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain is open. Eventually, you run out of water no matter how fast you pour. Think about it this way. Imagine you're planning a potluck dinner where everyone brings enough food to feed 5 people. That works great if there are 5 people bringing food for every person who's just eating. But what happens when that ratio changes to just 2 people bringing food for each diner? Suddenly, there's not enough food to go around, and somebody's going home hungry. The system wasn't designed for this reality. When Social Security was created, these demographic trends weren't even on the radar. Nobody predicted that birth rates would plummet so dramatically or that life expectancy would increase so significantly. The people who created Social Security weren't wrong. They just couldn't foresee how fundamentally American demographics would change. Some generations were lucky enough to hit the demographic sweet spot. They benefited from high worker-to-beneficiary ratios throughout their careers and retirement. But for Millennials and Gen Z, they're entering a system where the math simply doesn't work anymore. What makes this problem particularly tricky is that demographic changes happen slowly. Too slowly for most people to notice in their day-to-day lives. It's not like a stock market crash that makes headlines. It's more like climate change, a gradual shift that's easy to ignore until suddenly the consequences become impossible to avoid. Crossing the threshold, inside the trust fund time bomb. Unlike those slow-moving demographic trends, Social Security's money problems aren't some distant threat, they're already here. Remember that bathtub analogy we mentioned? Well, the water's been draining since 2021, and the $2.8 trillion trust fund is losing billions every year, while most Americans have no clue it's happening. Let's visualize what's happening with Social Security's finances. Picture that trust fund as a bathtub that's been slowly filling up since the 1980s during the surplus years. Now the drain has been unplugged, but water is still trickling in, just not enough to offset what's flowing out. That's exactly where we are today, and if nothing changes, we can calculate exactly when that bathtub will be empty. Here's how the Social Security system actually works. Current workers' payroll taxes directly pay for current retirees' benefits. Any excess traditionally went into the trust fund. Now we're tapping the trust fund to cover the shortfall. The system isn't storing your personal contributions for your future. Since 2021, Social Security has officially been in the red, paying out more in benefits than it collects in taxes. By the end of 2023, the trust fund reserves stood at approximately $2.788 trillion, which sounds massive until you realize that's down $41 billion from where it started the year. That's $41 billion disappearing from Social Security's savings in just 12 months. Over $112 million vanishing every single day. And things are accelerating. In 2024, experts project the annual shortfall will balloon to around $100 billion. In 2023, Social Security's total revenue was $1.351 trillion. The problem? The program spent $1.392 trillion. That $41 billion difference came from the trust fund. Think of it like your monthly paycheck covering most expenses, but you're consistently short about $200. Using savings works for a while, but what happens when those savings run dry? This is happening now because baby boomers are retiring in huge numbers, about 10,000 per day. With fewer workers supporting each retiree, the math doesn't work anymore. The system was designed assuming the population would remain pyramid-shaped, wide at the bottom with lots of workers, narrower at the top with fewer retirees. But that pyramid now looks more like a rectangle. Social Security operates through two main trust funds: the Old Age and Survivors Insurance, OASI, trust fund for retirement benefits, and a separate fund for disability benefits. The OASI fund, the big one that pays retirement benefits, is projected to run dry by 2033. That's less than a decade away. The combined funds, including disability, will last until about 2035. When those trust funds hit zero, Social Security doesn't completely disappear. That's a common misconception. Instead, benefits would immediately be cut to match whatever is coming in through current payroll taxes. Based on current projections, that means an across-the-board cut of about 21% to all retirement benefits. Over time, the situation worsens. If nothing changes, by 2098, Social Security would only be able to pay about 73% of promised benefits. Someone retiring in the 2090s could face a 27% cut from what they were promised. The most important thing to understand is that this isn't some theoretical future problem. The money is flowing out right now. Every day that passes, another $100+ million evaporates from the trust fund. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the system worked as designed for decades. During the peak working years of baby boomers, Social Security collected more than it paid out. Those surpluses, over $2.8 trillion worth, were supposed to cushion the demographic shifts we're experiencing now. And they are, but only temporarily. The trust fund is like a buffer giving us time to fix the underlying problem. But instead of using that time wisely, we've been hitting snooze for decades while our financial buffer gets smaller and smaller. The rate of drainage is accelerating. By the early 2030s, we'll see annual deficits of hundreds of billions, rapidly depleting whatever remains in the fund. The system currently collects 12.4% payroll tax, 6.2% from you and 6.2% from your employer, on earnings up to $168,600 as of 2024. That cap will rise to $176,100 in 2025, but even with these increases, the math simply doesn't work anymore. When the OASI fund is depleted by 2033, retirement benefits would face that 21% cut if no changes are made. For the combined trust funds, depletion around 2035 would mean benefits reduced to about 83% of their scheduled amount, a 17% cut affecting every single retiree. Politicians often frame Social Security reform as something for future generations. But this isn't just about millennials or Gen Z. The benefit cuts will affect anyone planning to be alive in 2033, including boomers who will be in their 70s and 80s by then. Almost everyone alive today will either experience these benefit cuts directly or feel their effects ripple through the economy and their families. When nearly every retiree suddenly loses a fifth of their income, that impacts consumer spending, housing markets, healthcare systems, and family support structures. Meeting the Mentor, expert breakdown of the $84 trillion question. When a fifth of retirement income suddenly disappears, that's definitely concerning. But it's nothing compared to the $84 trillion elephant in the room that most people have no idea exists. This isn't some made-up doomsday number thrown around to scare you into clicking. It's the actual calculated Social Security funding gap that grows by billions every single day while Congress hits the snooze button on fixing it. And honestly, it's way bigger than most of us can even wrap our heads around. Picture this. I'm sitting across from Kathleen Romig at a weathered conference table stacked with research papers. The fluorescent lights flicker above as this veteran Social Security analyst from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities explains what this massive number actually means. According to Romig, that $84 trillion represents the total funding gap Social Security faces over the next 75 years if we want to keep paying out benefits at their current levels. When we talk about the $84 trillion figure, Romig explains, leaning forward with intensity, we're looking at the complete funding shortfall over a 75-year period. It's the gap between what Social Security has promised to pay out and what it's projected to collect in taxes if nothing changes. In another conversation, Romina Bocha points out something crucial about this growing financial chasm while gesturing to demographic charts covering her office wall. The actuarial deficit keeps growing primarily because of demographic shifts, she notes. Our aging population combined with falling birth rates is creating a perfect storm for Social Security's finances. Let me try to put this staggering number in perspective for you. The entire U.S. economy, everything we produce in a year, is about $25 trillion. So this Social Security shortfall is more than 3 times the size of our entire annual economic output. It's also roughly 4 times the current national debt that politicians are always freaking out about. If you stack this amount in $1 bills, it would reach to the moon and back more than 30 times. Or think about it this way. It would be enough to give every single American about $250,000. That's a house in many parts of the country, for every man, woman, and child. This gigantic number actually comes from a pretty simple calculation. The Social Security Administration uses something called the actuarial deficit to measure the program's financial health. Right now, that deficit stands at 3.5% of taxable payroll. In normal person speak, that means we'd need to immediately either raise Social Security taxes by 3.5 percentage points or cut benefits by an equivalent amount to make the math work over the next 75 years. That 3.5% might sound small, like losing just $3.50 from every $100 in your paycheck. But when this small percentage accumulates across all American workers over 75 years, it balloons into that eye-popping figure. You might be wondering why this number keeps getting bigger instead of smaller. Shouldn't someone be fixing this? The reality is that every year Congress does nothing. The problem literally gets more expensive to solve. It's like watching a small leak in your roof get bigger while refusing to call a roofer. Eventually, you're not dealing with a repair. You're looking at replacing the entire house. The longer we wait to address this shortfall, Romig points out, the more drastic the necessary changes become. What could be solved with moderate adjustments today will require much more painful changes if we delay. Another factor making this worse is the dropping worker-to-beneficiary ratio. The experts at the Social Security Board of Trustees project that by 2033, there will only be about 2.4 workers for each beneficiary. That's simply not enough people paying into the system to support the benefits being paid out under the current structure. Without changes, when the trust funds run out around 2034 to 2035, Social Security can only pay about 79% of scheduled benefits. For the average retiree getting $1,800 monthly, that's suddenly dropping to about $1,422, a $378 monthly loss. That's your groceries, utilities, or healthcare costs disappearing overnight. Fixing this problem wouldn't even be that complicated from a math perspective. Experts have laid out several clear options: raising the retirement age, increasing payroll taxes, lifting the cap on taxable earnings, reducing benefits for higher earners, or some combination of these approaches. The challenge isn't figuring out what to do, it's getting politicians to actually do it. Every year Congress delays addressing Social Security's funding issues, the gap grows larger, and the solutions become more painful. We're facing a situation, Bocha explains, where the funding structure is fundamentally unsustainable due to demographic realities. The declining ratio of workers to beneficiaries means we simply cannot continue with the current system unchanged. Why isn't this front-page news every day? Why aren't politicians talking about it in every speech? Part of the problem is that the number is literally too big for most of us to comprehend. It's like trying to understand the distance to Alpha Centauri. We know it's really far, but our brains just aren't equipped to truly grasp it. The other issue is that fixing Social Security requires trade-offs that are politically unpopular. Raising taxes? Nobody likes that. Cutting benefits? Even worse. Pushing back the retirement age? Good luck winning your next election after proposing that. Social Security isn't an abstract government program. It's actual money that millions of real people are counting on to survive. When the system can only pay 79% of promised benefits, that impact will ripple through every corner of our economy. The actuarial deficit of 3.5% might sound like accounting jargon, but translated into dollars, it reveals the true scale of the challenge we're facing. And unlike many other economic concerns, tests and allies, the human face of benefit dependency. That ticking clock isn't just counting down to some abstract fiscal deadline. It's measuring out the remaining security for people like Gloria. At 78, she's part of a silent crisis hiding in plain sight. 40% of older Americans depend entirely on Social Security for survival, with nothing else to cushion the blow when those checks shrink. How do you tell someone who's worked their whole life that the safety net they were promised is about to drop them? Gloria's monthly Social Security check of $1,500 pays for her tiny one-bedroom apartment, medications, utilities, and if she's careful, groceries for the month. There's no wiggle room, no emergency fund, and definitely no vacations. When her refrigerator broke last year, she lived out of a cooler with ice for 3 months until her church took up a collection. I worked as a home health aide for 42 years, Gloria explains, her hands slightly trembling as she sorts her pills into a weekly organizer. I never made enough to save much. Every dollar went to raising my kids and keeping a roof over our heads. My company didn't offer a pension. Social Security was supposed to be there for us. In Gloria's senior apartment complex, nearly everyone has a similar story. There's Richard, 81, a former factory worker who skips doses of his expensive medications to make them last longer. I already wear sweaters indoors and keep the thermostat at 65 in winter, he says, rubbing his arthritic hands together. How much colder am I supposed to get? Then there's Martha, 75, who worked retail jobs her entire life and now spends hours calling around for food pantry schedules to supplement her meager grocery budget. We held up our end of the bargain, Martha says firmly. I started working at 16 and didn't stop until I physically couldn't stand behind a cash register anymore at 72. If they cut my benefits now, what was it all for? For someone like Gloria living on $1,500 a month, a 25% reduction means $375 less each month. That's her entire food and utility budget gone. There's no fat to trim when you're already down to the bone. What makes this particularly heartbreaking is that these vulnerable seniors have already spent decades contributing to the system. They paid their Social Security taxes throughout their working lives, often at jobs that offered little in retirement benefits. The social contract was simple. Contribute during your working years, and you'll have basic security in old age. Social Security wasn't designed to be anyone's sole support in retirement. It was conceived as one leg of a three-legged stool, alongside pensions and personal savings. But as pensions have disappeared from the private sector and wages for many workers have stagnated, that theoretical model has collapsed for millions of Americans. Now that one remaining leg is wobbling. The geographic distribution adds another layer to this crisis. In some rural communities, most seniors rely almost exclusively on Social Security. These areas already struggle with limited healthcare access, transportation challenges, and fewer social services. Any reduction in benefits would devastate these communities. Housing creates another pressure point. Unlike previous generations who often entered retirement with paid-off mortgages, many of today's seniors are renters or still making mortgage payments. My rent goes up every year, but my check doesn't keep pace, says Gloria. I'm already paying 70% of my income for this little apartment. Where am I supposed to go if I can't afford it anymore? The timing of potential benefit cuts coincides with other challenges facing older Americans. Healthcare costs continue to rise faster than inflation. Medicare doesn't cover dental, vision, or long-term care, leaving significant gaps that Social Security benefits often try to fill. For women like Gloria, the situation is particularly dire. They typically earn less during their working years, take more time out of the workforce to care for family members, and live longer than men, creating a perfect storm of financial insecurity in later life. Last winter, Richard's heating bill doubled unexpectedly. He spent 3 weeks in January wearing his coat indoors and heating just one room of his apartment. I ended up in the hospital with pneumonia, he recalls. The doctor asked why I hadn't turned up the heat. I just laughed. What was I supposed to say? Gloria has her own system for stretching her budget. Monday through Thursday, I eat oatmeal for breakfast and dinner. Lunch is half a sandwich. Fridays, I treat myself to eggs. Weekends, I sometimes get invited to my daughters, but their family is struggling too, so I don't go too often. What happens when these vulnerable seniors can no longer make ends meet? Some move in with adult children, creating financial strain across multiple generations. Others end up in nursing homes paid for by Medicaid after spending down there. Minimal assets. Many simply suffer in silence, eating one meal a day or leaving their homes unheated. The irony is that any savings from Social Security benefit cuts would likely create costs elsewhere in the system. Increased reliance on other safety net programs would shift the financial burden rather than eliminate it. And the human costs in dignity, health, and lives can't be calculated on any balance sheet. As policymakers debate abstract concepts, it's easy to forget that each percentage point represents millions of real people with no margin for error in their financial lives. For Gloria, Richard, Martha, and millions like them, this isn't a policy debate, it's about survival. Approach to the innermost cave. Will millennials get anything? While today's seniors face immediate hardships, an entire generation is watching this crisis unfold with a different kind of anxiety. Almost half of millennials, yeah, that's right, nearly 50%, are convinced they won't see a single penny from Social Security when they reach retirement age. But here's the reality check. This widespread belief doesn't actually match what the math tells us. And this perception gap could end up costing millennials hundreds of thousands of dollars in their retirement planning. Let's clear something up right away. If you're scrolling through this video thinking, why should I even care about Social Security when it'll be gone by the time I need it? The math tells a different story. Even if Congress completely ghosts this problem and does absolutely nothing to fix the system, millennials would still receive around 75 to 80% of what they're promised. That's definitely not ideal, but it's significantly more than zero. In real dollars, this shortfall is serious business. For a 35-year-old making $100,000 annually, a 20% reduction in future benefits means losing between $21,000 and $25,000 every year of retirement. Over your lifetime, this adds up to missing between $560,000 and $675,000 in total benefits. That's a house-sized hole in your retirement plan. Millennials face a precarious situation previous generations didn't encounter. They're dealing with potentially reduced Social Security benefits while watching traditional pensions virtually disappear. Remember those magical retirement plans where your employer guaranteed you a specific monthly payment for life after retirement? Those are basically going extinct. Retirement planning used to be a sturdy three-legged stool: Social Security, company pensions, and personal savings. For millennials, that stool is wobbling dangerously. One leg is shrinking, another is practically sawed off, and the third leg, personal savings, is straining under all the weight. Imagine trying to balance on a stool where two legs are compromised. That's the millennial retirement situation. Making matters worse, millennials are already behind on retirement savings compared to previous generations at the same age. Over 42% between 25 and 36 are lugging around student debt, significantly impacting their net worth and saving ability. The numbers paint a clear picture. The average net wealth to income ratio for millennials aged 34 to 38 is just 70%. Compared to Generation X and late baby boomers at the same age, the wealth gap is real and growing. This isn't because millennials are blowing money on avocado toast, I roll, but because they entered adulthood during one of the worst economic periods in recent history, faced skyrocketing education costs, and encountered a housing market nightmare. The long-term outlook is concerning. A 2022 Urban Institute study projected about 38% of early millennials will have inadequate retirement income when they hit 70 years old, a significantly higher percentage than older generations face. The retirement situation isn't improving, it's deteriorating. For millennial retirement planning, adjusting expectations about Social Security coverage is essential. While previous generations could count on Social Security replacing a decent chunk of pre-retirement income, millennials might only see it replacing between 20% to 60%. That's a massive gap needing to be filled somehow. The Social Security Administration's Trustees Report is straightforward. Beginning in 2035, the program will only pay about 79% of the benefits it owes to retirees and survivors. This isn't fear-mongering. It's the official projection based on current funding. Why isn't everyone talking about this massive problem? Psychology plays a role. When problems seem too big or too distant, our brains tend to ignore them. It's easier to focus on immediate financial concerns like next month's rent than retirement decades away. This psychological distance makes the problem particularly dangerous. Every year you delay addressing this retirement gap, makes it harder to fix. Each year of delay means saving significantly more to compensate. Many millennials fall into all-or-nothing thinking. The belief that Social Security won't exist at all can be harmful if it leads to disengagement with retirement planning. Some might think, if Social Security is doomed and I can't save enough anyway, why bother trying? This fatalistic attitude is understandable, but ultimately self-defeating. The reality has more nuance. Social Security will almost certainly exist when millennials retire. It's just likely to replace a smaller portion of pre-retirement income than for today's retirees. Understanding this distinction is crucial for proper financial planning. What's truly concerning is the compounding effect of all these factors. Reduced Social Security benefits plus vanishing pensions plus lower savings rates plus higher debt loads create a potential retirement crisis unlike anything we've seen before. Each challenge alone would be manageable, but together they form a perfect storm that could leave millions of millennials financially vulnerable in their later years. This extends beyond personal finance to become a societal issue. If a large percentage of millennials, America's largest generation, reach retirement age without adequate resources, the economic and social implications will be enormous. Increased senior poverty, greater strain on safety nets, reduced consumer spending, and potential housing market disruptions could all result from this demographic shift. The ordeal, the true cost of inaction. The mathematical reality of Social Security cuts isn't just some future problem to worry about later. It's a looming humanitarian crisis with very real human consequences. When that trust fund depletion happens in 2035, we're not just talking about modest lifestyle adjustments for seniors. The projected 20% benefit reduction would instantly push millions of older Americans below the poverty line, transforming retirement from a time of security into a desperate struggle for survival. This benefit reduction would cause a 50% increase in poverty rates among Social Security beneficiaries. That represents millions of real people suddenly unable to afford basic necessities. Picture an elderly woman sitting at her kitchen table, bills spread out before her, calculator in hand, tears welling in her eyes as she realizes she can't afford both her heart medication and heat for the winter months. This scenario awaits countless seniors if Congress fails to act. These cuts create deeply unequal impacts across our society. Black and Hispanic seniors face particularly severe consequences due to their greater reliance on Social Security income. The system designed as a universal safety net would create a two-tier retirement reality. Those with substantial private savings who remain secure, and those who fall into poverty through no fault of their own. Consider the math. The average monthly benefit of $1,900 already leaves many seniors struggling. A 20% reduction means $380 less each month. For someone living on the financial edge, that's the difference between housing stability and homelessness, between independence and dependence, between dignity and desperation. Women face especially harsh consequences in this scenario. Years of wage discrimination and career interruptions for caregiving already leave women more vulnerable to retirement poverty than men. With benefit cuts, older women living alone would be among the hardest hit. More than half potentially falling below the poverty line with just a 17% reduction. The impact extends far beyond individual hardship to create broader societal costs. Seniors unable to afford basics turn to other social services, food assistance, housing subsidies, Medicaid. The expenses don't vanish, they shift to different government programs, creating additional strain on taxpayers and public resources. The economic ripples spread throughout communities. Seniors living on reduced incomes spend less at local businesses. Their adult children often step in financially, undermining their own retirement savings and ability to help the next generation with college. This creates a multi-generational cycle of financial insecurity that can persist for decades. Demographic realities make this challenge increasingly difficult. By 2033, our worker-to-beneficiary ratio will hit just 2.4 workers per beneficiary. This mathematical reality means either higher taxes or lower benefits, and without action, the latter becomes inevitable. What makes this situation so frustrating is its predictability. This isn't some sudden economic shock. It's a slow-motion crisis we're watching approach in real time. The Social Security Administration clearly projects benefits will need to be cut to about 83% of scheduled amounts when the trust fund depletes. Behind these numbers are real lives. Imagine an 80-year-old widow living on $1,500 monthly from Social Security. She's already choosing between necessary medications and utilities. Now her income drops to $1,245 monthly. Her carefully managed budget collapses. Her independence vanishes. Her dignity erodes. That's the human cost of political paralysis. The consequences extend beyond financial strain. Seniors suddenly plunged into poverty after decades of work experience crushing psychological impacts. Increased depression, worsened social isolation as transportation and community activities become unaffordable, and deteriorating health when preventive care becomes a luxury they can't afford. For the 17 million Americans aged 65 plus who are already economically insecure, living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, any benefit reduction becomes catastrophic. These aren't people with substantial retirement portfolios. They're everyday Americans who worked hard their entire lives, often in physically demanding jobs that took a toll on their bodies. Housing insecurity emerges as a particularly severe threat. Unlike previous generations who often entered retirement with paid-off mortgages, many of today's seniors rent or still make mortgage payments. When housing consumes 50% or more of fixed income, even small benefit reductions can trigger homelessness. Healthcare costs compound this problem dramatically. As we age, medical expenses inevitably increase. Even with Medicare, out-of-pocket costs can be substantial. Benefit cuts would force impossible choices between necessary medical care and other basic needs like food and shelter. The regional impact of these cuts would devastate entire communities. In rural areas, where economic opportunities may be limited, Social Security forms the backbone of local economies. Benefit cuts wouldn't just hurt individual seniors, they would cripple entire towns where Social Security payments circulate through local businesses, supporting jobs and services for all residents. Picture the gut-wrenching family conversations when these cuts hit. Adult children struggling to support aging parents while managing their own retirement savings and children's education needs. Seniors at kitchen tables with calculators, deciding which bills they can pay this month and which must wait. These aren't theoretical discussions. They're impossible family dilemmas with no good solutions. What happens in 2035 carries a technical name: trust fund depletion. But what it really means is broken promises to vulnerable Americans. After decades of paying into the system, retirees would suddenly receive less than what they were promised and planned for, creating a profound betrayal that erodes trust in our most fundamental social contracts. The reward: policy solutions that could save the system. Behind all those terrifying statistics about benefit cuts and senior poverty lies a rarely discussed truth. Social Security is totally fixable. The $176,100 tax cap that most Americans never even think about, eliminating just that one number could solve more than half the problem. The real question isn't whether we can save Social Security. It's whether we're willing to have the uncomfortable conversations about who should bear the cost. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. Fixing Social Security means someone's going to feel the pinch. There's no magical solution where nobody sacrifices anything. But we do have options, and understanding them is the first step to making smart choices about the future of a program millions of Americans depend on. When policy experts talk about fixing Social Security, they break it down into three main approaches: raising more money through taxes, reducing benefits, or doing some combination of both. Each option comes with trade-offs that make politicians squirm, explaining why they avoid this conversation like an awkward family dinner. The most powerful single change might be eliminating the Social Security tax cap. Most people don't realize Social Security taxes only apply to earnings up to $176,100 in 2025. Make more than that. You stop paying into Social Security after hitting that ceiling. According to the Social Security trustees, removing this cap would close 53% of the funding gap over the next decade, solving half the problem with one policy change. This solution places the burden on higher-income Americans, who would see their tax bills increase significantly. Someone earning $300,000 would pay an additional 12.4% on about $124,000 of their income, not pocket change. While many argue wealthier Americans can better afford the hit, others view it as unfairly targeting success. and wealthy Americans have powerful lobbying groups that make this politically challenging. Moving from tax increases to benefit adjustments, another option is gradually increasing the retirement age to 69 or 70. This works as a benefit cut in disguise. Waiting longer to collect effectively reduces your lifetime benefits. The Congressional Budget Office estimates raising the retirement age to 70 could save about $72 billion over the next several years. The argument goes that since we're living longer, we should work longer too. However, this creates genuine hardships for people in physically demanding jobs who simply can't work into their late 60s without serious health consequences. Think construction workers, nurses, or factory employees whose bodies are already wearing down. This solution disproportionately affects lower-income Americans, who typically have shorter life expectancies to begin with. A third approach, straightforward but politically dangerous, is increasing the payroll tax rate. Currently, workers and employers each pay 6.2% of wages towards Social Security. Experts suggest raising this to about 16.47% would substantially close the funding gap. Even tiny increases add up. A 0.1 percentage point bump would generate $601 billion over the next decade. This approach hits lower and middle-income workers hardest since they spend more of their income on necessities. A single parent making $15 an hour would take home even less money to save a retirement program they're uncertain will be there for them. A more balanced alternative is progressive price indexing, which maintains current benefit levels for lower-income workers while reducing benefits for higher-income retirees. The idea is that wealthier retirees can better absorb a reduction since they typically have other retirement resources, generating savings of about 1.21% of payroll over 75 years. This protects vulnerable seniors while potentially weakening the universal nature of Social Security. When a program becomes seen as welfare rather than an earned benefit, history shows it becomes more vulnerable to future cuts. Fixing Social Security is like walking a tightrope. Lean too far in any direction, and the whole system risks falling out of balance. The most effective solution likely involves a combination of these approaches. We could partially raise the tax cap, modestly increase the retirement age, slightly bump the payroll tax rate, and implement some targeted adjustments for higher-income retirees, spreading the burden so no single group bears the entire weight. For example, we could eliminate the tax cap, but increase the retirement age to 68 instead of 70, or implement a smaller 1% payroll tax increase while modestly reducing benefits for the wealthiest 20% of retirees. This balanced approach allows flexibility. We can adjust different elements to find the right balance. Some progress has happened already. The Social Security Fairness Act, signed in 2025, eliminated provisions that unfairly reduced benefits for public sector workers, showing bipartisan solutions are possible when focusing on fairness rather than ideology. What makes this conversation so challenging is that any real solution requires confronting the 3.5% actuarial deficit head-on. That means accepting some combination of higher taxes and adjusted benefits. There's simply no mathematical path forward that doesn't involve these trade-offs. The holdup? Fixing Social Security requires asking people to pay more now or accept less later, electoral kryptonite. It's easier to kick this can down the road and let future politicians deal with it. But policy experts across the political spectrum agree. The longer we wait, the worse our options become. Every year we delay addressing this funding shortfall, the more drastic the eventual solutions must be. Gradual changes implemented over decades hurt less than sudden adjustments forced by crisis. The question isn't whether we can fix Social Security. We absolutely can. The real question is whether we have the political courage to make smart trade-offs now to prevent a crisis later. Do we want a retirement system that works for everyone, or are we the road back, personal financial strategies for a new reality? Have you ever wondered how much of your daily spending could actually transform your retirement future? While politicians debate the fate of Social Security, here's something mind-blowing. Just $33 a week, less than your average takeout order, could completely neutralize those benefit cuts experts keep warning about. That's right, the price of a few coffees might be all that stands between you and a secure retirement. Look, I get it. With crushing student loans, insane housing costs, and the general financial chaos of your 20s and 30s, the idea of saving even more money probably makes you want to scream into a pillow. But hear me out, this is actually doable, and the math proves it. Let's break it down. If you're 35 years old making $100,000 a year, you'd need to invest just $2,543 annually to make up for those potential Social Security cuts. That's about $33 per week, or roughly the cost of that treat-yourself sushi order you get when you're too tired to cook. The best part, if your employer offers any kind of match on your retirement contributions, that number gets even smaller. This isn't complex financial wizardry. It's simply compound interest working its magic. Think of it as tiny financial raindrops collecting over decades to form a massive retirement reservoir. If you save just $25 a week with a 5% return, you'd have around $165,000 after 40 years. That's $52,000 of your own money tripling over time. And that's with a relatively conservative strategy. Timing is everything, though. Starting 10 years later means saving dramatically more to reach the same goal. Money you save in your 30s has decades to grow, while money saved in your 50s barely has time to say hello to the market before you need it back. Once you hit 50, the government allows catch-up contributions, extra money you can put into tax-advantaged accounts. In 2025, that means an additional $7,500 in your 401k on top of the regular limit, bringing your potential contribution to $31,000. This is perfect for anyone who needs to accelerate their savings later in life. Another strategy worth exploring is a Roth conversion. You pay taxes on money from a traditional retirement account now when you move it to a Roth IRA, but then it grows tax-free, and you won't pay taxes when withdrawing in retirement. This creates tax-free income later when every dollar matters. For guaranteed income similar to Social Security, consider annuities. These financial products function like a DIY pension. You invest a chunk of money and receive regular payments for a specific period or even lifetime. They're not flashy investments, but they provide predictability when the market's volatile. That regular monthly payment can be incredibly reassuring when everything else seems uncertain. Financial experts typically recommend saving at least 15% of your income for retirement, including employer matches in your 401k. That match is literally free money. If you're not capturing every penny of that match, you're basically leaving a portion of your salary on the table. I know what you're thinking, but Social Security will still exist, right? Absolutely. Even worst-case projections show the system paying about 75 to 80% of promised benefits. It won't vanish, it just might deliver less than promised. These strategies help fill that gap, not replace the entire system. Here's a sobering fact. About half of seniors 65 plus get at least 50% of their income from Social Security. That's massive dependence on a challenged system. Building your own safety net now creates options many current retirees simply don't have. Starting small doesn't require a complete lifestyle overhaul. You don't need to survive on ramen or cancel your streaming services. Well, maybe cut back to just 2 or 3 instead of all 5. Small, consistent actions compound into massive results over time. Try this. When you get a raise, immediately direct half to retirement savings before seeing it in your paycheck. You won't miss what you never had, and your future self will be doing a happy dance. Or use the roundup method. Some apps automatically round purchases to the nearest dollar and invest the difference. Spend $3.50 on coffee. 50 cents goes to your future. It's practically painless but adds up surprisingly fast. The retirement landscape has transformed dramatically. Previous generations relied on a 3-legged stool: Social Security, pensions, and personal savings. Most millennials have just 2: Social Security, potentially with shorter legs, and personal savings. With the pension leg largely gone for most workers, your personal savings leg needs to be extra strong. The truth is, taking control of your retirement destiny is empowering. Instead of waiting for Congress to maybe possibly someday fix a complicated system, you can take action today that will definitely improve your future. No waiting, no hoping, no depending on politicians to do. The right thing. Return with the elixir, becoming an informed advocate. Taking your financial future into your own hands is super smart, but there's a massive elephant in the room nobody's talking about during election season. Despite nearly 90% of Americans over 50 considering Social Security very important, according to a recent AARP survey, politicians treat this $84 trillion crisis like an optional homework assignment. They've calculated that you don't care enough to make them sweat. And honestly, that silence is exactly how this problem got so massive in the first place. Politicians avoid the Social Security topic like it's a slowly leaking pipe in the basement, ignoring it until water is pouring through the ceiling. They've convinced themselves voters don't prioritize it, figuring most people either think it won't affect them directly or that some magical solution will appear without tough choices. Meanwhile, the clock keeps ticking toward 2035 when benefits could face serious cuts. This isn't some distant problem. It's happening now, while everyone pretends not to notice. Here's the reality. The AARP survey proves there's actually massive public interest in Social Security's future. What's missing isn't interest, it's pressure. And that's something we can change starting today. Without public pressure, Congress naturally focuses on whatever issues seem more pressing or likely to win votes. It's basic political survival instinct. Why tackle a complex problem with painful trade-offs when you can focus on issues that get better headlines? You have more power than you realize. Start asking candidates specific questions about their Social Security plans. Don't accept vague promises about protecting seniors or ensuring solvency. Push for details with questions like, what specific steps will you take to ensure the long-term solvency of Social Security? Or, how do you plan to address the projected benefit cuts in 2035? These aren't gotcha questions. They're legitimate policy concerns that affect literally everyone. And when enough people start asking them, politicians have no choice but to start developing actual answers. When evaluating reform proposals, consider how they impact various income groups. Benefit cuts would hit low-income seniors harder since they rely more heavily on Social Security. Someone getting 90% of their income from Social Security faces a very different situation than someone for whom it's just a nice bonus on top of substantial savings and investments. Understanding different reform options matters because each approach, raising taxes, adjusting benefits, changing eligibility ages, creates winners and losers. By becoming informed about these trade-offs, you can advocate for solutions that align with your values about fairness and responsibility. Public pressure works. Look back to 1983, when Congress passed significant bipartisan reforms to Social Security, including gradually raising the retirement age and adjusting payroll taxes. Those changes extended the program's solvency for decades because there was genuine public concern and political will to address the problem before it became a crisis. Another powerful step is talking about Social Security with friends and family across generations. These conversations often don't happen because younger people think it's not their problem yet, while older folks worry about frightening their children with financial doom. Break that silence. Share what you've learned about the challenges and potential solutions. Cross-generational conversations foster something crucial: intergenerational solidarity. Social Security isn't just a senior issue. It's an everyone issue. Today's workers fund today's retirees, and today's children will eventually support today's workers. We're all connected in this system with a stake in its future. Social Security reform discussions often get framed as a battle between generations, with millennials supposedly funding benefits they'll never receive. But that framing misses the point entirely. A sustainable solution requires all generations working together to create a system that's fair across age groups. Your advocacy can be simple but effective. Follow trusted sources providing factual information about Social Security's finances. Share articles on social media. Contact your representatives regularly. Even a simple email saying, "I care about Social Security's future, and I'm paying attention to how you address it," sends a powerful message. Politicians respond to voter priorities. If enough people signal that Social Security matters, it will quickly become a priority. This is about demonstrating that voters are paying attention and will hold elected officials accountable for addressing this challenge. When evaluating candidates, listen for specifics. Are they acknowledging the actual size of the problem? Are they discussing real solutions with difficult trade-offs? Or offering vague reassurances without concrete plans? Candidates willing to have honest conversations about Social Security, even uncomfortable ones, are taking the issue seriously. Think about what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be one that honors its commitments to seniors and ensures a basic level of dignity for all in retirement? Or do we want to be a society that ignores problems until they become crises, then scrambles for solutions that harm the most vulnerable? This $84 trillion question goes beyond numbers. It's about values. It's about facing difficult truths today rather than passing bigger problems to future generations. It's about whether we believe in collective responsibility for ensuring everyone can age with dignity. You might think, I'm just one person. How much difference can I make? Potentially a lot. Social movements often start small, with just a few people raising awareness. As more join, political calculations shift. What seemed impossible becomes possible, and what seemed inevitable becomes preventable. By becoming an informed advocate who understands the trade-offs involved in social security reform, you help create conditions for meaningful change. You shift the political calculation, create space for honest conversation about solutions, and help ensure that changes reflect a broad consensus about fairness rather than hasty decisions made in crisis. The future just got a lot more real for millennials. If Congress doesn't step up, experts warn that poverty among Social Security beneficiaries could jump by more than 50% once the trust fund runs dry. That's potentially millions of real people facing food insecurity and housing instability in their golden years. For millennials specifically, the math is clear. You're likely looking at only about 79% of your promised benefits by 2035. A significant chunk of your retirement income vanishing unless something changes. 2 things you can do today. Pump up your personal savings game to offset potential cuts and advocate for policy reforms. Your financial future and our society's values are on the line. Are you ready